Económico webinar series. This morning, we'll have the pleasure of speaking to Professor Gregory Bunch from the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. The topic today, as you see on your screen, is business as an agent of human flourishing. I want to thank you, Professor, for being today with us and for sharing your time. And also, I would like to thank Enrique Perret for making this from the U.S.-Mexico Foundation for making this possible. Just as a brief introduction, Professor, Desarrollo Económico, and together with Desarrollo Económico de Chihuahua, we host this webinars each month. And both our organizations are business organizations from the private sector. We promote initiatives that contribute to the economic development of our regions and that could help improve the quality of life of our citizens. I'm going to start reading Professor Bunch bio very briefly, and then we will continue with the presentation, and after that, at the end, we'll have a session for questions and answers, Professor, if that's okay with you.
I love it.
Perfect. So Greg Bunch draws on a wealth of experience as an entrepreneur, manager, consultant, alderman, and teacher. He is the founder of Master Plan International Corporation, a strategy consulting firm. He was also a partner at Brand Trust, a brand strategy consultancy. Greg co-funded a healthcare software startup in the Bay Area. He has served on corporate boards for financial services, healthcare, retail, franchising, and marketing firms. He works with Fortune 500 companies, family businesses, and startups in the area of innovation and strategy. He has worked with a broad array of companies, including Abbott Labs, American Express, Danaher, Dover, ETS, Harley-Davidson, Hewlett-Packard, Kimberly-Clark, McDonald's, PepsiCo, State Farm, and Yum Brands. Greg was an alderman in the city of West Chicago, serving on the infrastructure, public safety, and development committees. Greg has lectured nationally and internationally on topics related to strategy, creating customers, and innovation. He earned a bachelor's degree from Wheaton College in philosophy and an MD from Harvard University. Professor Bunch, is an honor to have you today with us, and the microphone is all yours. Thank you.
Federico, thank you very much for that introduction and for the opportunity to speak with your group today. And I want to thank Enrique for organizing this and Alberto Villarreal for inviting me to be on his advisory board, NEPANOA. Alberto is one of my former students who always inspires me because of his enthusiasm. I care deeply about business. I love business. I think business is a high calling. And today the topic is business as an agent of human flourishing in a VUCA world. A little bit about me. Federico mentioned this, but I teach in our University of Chicago's MBA program. You may know we're the #1 ranked business school in the world in many league charts, and some other charts we're 2 or 3 or 4, but we're always one of the top schools. We have the greatest number of Nobel Prize winners of any business school. We're famous as an academic business school, even more than the other really good schools. Our faculty focus on primary research. I came to the school about 15 years ago out of business, and I had started companies, turned companies around, sat on boards of companies. And I have a mantra that my class shouts at the beginning of every session. We say, the world needs more entrepreneurs. Now, some of you will say, I'm not an entrepreneur. Do you need me? I define an entrepreneur as someone who works in business, sees a problem, and then builds a solution to solve the problem. A friend of mine at MIT, Bill Aulet, defines innovation as invention times commercialization. You have to have something new, and it has to be, you have to make money at it. So I think that if you're working to solve human problems in a business world and you're doing new products, new services, you're an entrepreneur. Now, I have all of my students shout this, Omar, but the next thing I say privately, and Luis, you'll see the reason that I have it, that I only say this part, committed to human flourishing, is because my students may not have signed up for human flourishing. When they took the class, Claudia, they knew that they would get a great class on entrepreneurship. And over the years, the class that I teach and my colleague Jim Schrager teaches gets very high marks. But I've come to believe more and more that it's not just starting businesses, launching new products and services, it's doing them in a way that's committed to human flourishing. But Gerardo, not all of my students are yet ready to say they're committed to human flourishing. Maybe they're focused on getting rich or becoming famous, or I don't know what their focus is. So all I talk about is the world needs entrepreneurs, but I hope you will join me in being committed to human flourishing. To do that, there are different ways you could do it. You could be in the social services, you could be in government, you could be in the arts, you could be in education. But for business, the way that we're committed to human flourishing is to solve problems that create goods and services that people will pay us for. So that's sort of a little bit about me and my focus. I love showing this picture. This picture is from one of the most important battles of Europe. It's the Battle of Waterloo. In the foreground are the people in the red coats. They're the British. If your screen is high resolution, you'll see in the far ground, the soldiers are in blue. It's the French. So this is Napoleon Bonaparte versus the Duke of Wellington. And the reason I show the painting is because it shows the chaos on the battlefield. And our military officers in the US describe the battlefield as VUCA. They say that it is volatile, uncertain, complex, sometimes chaotic, and ambiguous. My Spanish is very bad, Humberto. I think that the words are almost all the same, though, in Espanol. Volatil. The biggest change is uncertain becomes what? Incierto, incierta. Complexo y ambiguo. So in English, it's VUCA. In Espanol, it's bica. In Mandarin, I have no idea, Raul. So this, though, describes not only the military battlefield, it describes our world as business people. We write business plans, and then we have to adapt them in light of changing conditions. Beginning with COVID, and then some major geopolitical issues going on, trade issues going on, we've maybe never been in a more VUCA circumstance. And as business leaders, we have to figure out how to benefit from this and help our customers, our employees, the owners of our businesses, even our society benefit. And so I'm going to talk about some of the big challenges we face. Then I'm going to talk about why I'm very hopeful, and then we'll go to questions and answers. The World Economic Forum published in 2021 their global risks. And if your screen is big enough, you can see them. I'll read a few from the top. Infectious diseases, well, COVID. Livelihood crises, we always have that with us. Extreme weather events, this has become worse. I was in London last week and working mostly with business people from India, and they were saying it was 50 degrees centigrade in parts of India already this year. It's they've never had heat like that in those places. Cybersecurity failures, we're seeing more and more of this, digital inequality, et cetera, et cetera. And when you look at all of these global risks, it can be overwhelming and dispiriting, and the ordinary person pulls back. The media pounds it into our face because, as William Randolph Hearst said, Pablo, if it bleeds, it leads. The news likes to tell us bad news because we click on it, and our minds can become occupied by all the bad things we're facing. But you know that as a business person, every risk is an opportunity. This is something you should write down. It's something you should learn to tell your people. When COVID broke out, I had been following it because we have a campus in China. I do business in China. I was aware of it rolling through that country and then going to Europe, especially Italy. You'll remember it shut down much of the country there. And Isabel, I knew it was coming to North America. I didn't know how bad it would be. I didn't know the effects, but I was preparing for what's the opportunity. And I made little videos for my students where I would just boldly shout, what's the opportunity? Because as a business person, every risk is an opportunity. And the bigger the problem, the bigger the business opportunity for us to solve. You know, what's a global, regional, societal problem that can become a business opportunity for you, that you, your investors, can make money on, that you can create great jobs for employees, that you can improve your state, your region? You know, what's the opportunity? As part of this, I created a framework called Flourishing CEOs. Now, you'll see, Miguel, that the reason that I use this title is it appeals to business students to think about being a flourishing CEO. But there's more to this than meets the eye. By flourishing CEOs, I mean we need to talk about 4 basic questions. How do our customers flourish? We need to start with our customer flourishing. It's our customers who keep us in business. It's our customers who pay for our children's education. It's our customers who give us our homes, our cars. Everything we have comes from our customer. How do we ensure that our customer flourishes? And then how do we ensure that our employees flourish? Because it's our employees who create these great products and services for our customers. And then, of course, how do we ensure that the owners flourish? You and I, many of us, are owners of businesses or shareholders in businesses, and we want a good return. Now, you may know about the University of Chicago that we are legendary for the phrase maximize shareholder value. This came out of a time in the 1960s that's called managerial capitalism, in which the managers took all of the profit out of the businesses, and there was very little left for the owners. Milton Friedman began to write about the importance of the owner getting a good return. And in 1982, at the Pierre Hotel, at the annual meeting, Jack Welch, who was then CEO of General Electric, said that the goal of GE was to maximize shareholder profit, shareholder value. And this doctrine went crazy throughout the business world, and it had a good historical reason. And this was to make sure owners were compensated in a fair and just way, that it respected the property rights of the owners, and that they were not kept from good profitability by managers who were spending for their own benefit. What we've seen in the last few years, though, is that this focus, extreme focus on shareholder value, has led to very short-term thinking that has actually hindered a lot of companies, and it certainly created a lot of skepticism among people. So I really believe that owners must flourish, but we have to balance it with these other things. The last one is S. How does society flourish? How does the world flourish? When I first started talking about this, one of my colleagues said to me, Adrian, he said, "Oh, you sound like a European socialist." And I looked at him and I said, "Well, have you ever been to Denmark or Sweden or Norway? These are pretty nice countries. I don't know that democratic socialism is so bad." But no, I'm not a democratic socialist. I love business. I love free enterprise. I think owners should get a fabulous return. I love when people can create a business and become very wealthy. So I'm not a democratic socialist, but I am somebody who says we over-indexed on owners to the detriment of others, and we probably need to rebalance some of this in our thinking and our teaching. We need better metrics for each of these things, especially for how do our customers flourish, how do our employees flourish, and how does our society flourish. We've got really good metrics for owners, our return on investment, return on equity, return on assets, we have good metrics for ownership. We don't have good hard metrics for the other three questions. And I'm hoping that my colleagues in accounting and finance will work on this because what gets measured gets done. By the way, again, I am not about giving away profit. I don't know if you know the name Fred Adler. Fred Adler was a great venture capitalist from a previous generation. To his portfolio companies, he had these pillows made that said happiness is positive cash flow, and he'd throw them at the CEOs of the companies he invested in. Not only do I think that we need to be committed to human flourishing, but in business, we need to be committed to positive cash flow. This is especially important, Sergio, because for 20 years, the business schools and the venture capitalists told businesses grow, grow, grow. And since capital was almost free, growth at any cost was a good strategy. But as we're seeing the tightening of the capital markets, people have forgotten how to get positive cash flow. So the discipline of having positive cash flow is something we need to think about. I'm going to go back, though, now to this concept of human flourishing and say, I'm going to talk about two important thinkers in this regard, one business thinker and a professor at Harvard, and then I'm going to open up for Q&A. The first is a business thinker that I have great regard for, the former CEO and chairman of PepsiCo, Indra Nooyi. She was one of the most important CEOs of our time, Alejandro. And at PepsiCo, she would say, it is our responsibility to make food that the poorest people want to eat, that they can afford to eat, that it's good for them to eat, that is good for society, and owners get a great return. Now, when she said this, Michelle, some of the analysts and actually some of the senior managers at PepsiCo said, that's a nice kind of public relations statement. That's not what we do. We make junk food. And she said, I know what we make. It's not good enough. She said, we have to change the mix. And you may know that she described the traditional Frito, Dorito, potato chip as fun for you. The traditional PepsiCo cola that's made with high fructose corn syrup, she called fun for you. The products that had lower salt and lower fat, the products that had no sugar, that had artificial sugar, she called better for you. And then there was a small part of the portfolio that she introduced that was good for you. My daughter is brilliant, and she's very skeptical of the lies and deception that public relations makes about big corporations. And she said, Daddy, they're just lying at PepsiCo. They're not trying to make food that's good for us. And I said, you know what? I can tell you that the senior people want to serve food that's good for people. They have children too, they have grandchildren too, but their guests don't necessarily want to have the healthiest food. When Indra retired, I think it was 2 years ago now, the portfolio had increased to 6% of their portfolio was defined as good for you. Now, you could look cynically at that and say, well, that means 94% of PepsiCo's portfolio is by definition not good for you. And I would agree that that's true, and so would Indra. But she was saying, how do we change things? Things that were not right in the past, you don't change them quickly. You change them carefully through good business efforts, through good execution, through changing business models, through innovation. we must do all of these things. And I want to show you another professor. This is a Harvard professor now, to show you that it's not just at University of Chicago we're thinking about this. Rebecca Henderson is a brilliant scholar at Harvard, and she's written a book called Reimagining Capitalism in a World on Fire. I'm not going to read all the words on this slide. They'd be hard to read, but she talks about the fact that the world is heating up, that wealth is rushing to the top. The 50 richest people own more than the poorer half of humanity. So 50 people own more than 4 billion. She's not opposed to wealth. She's a wealthy person, but she's seeing this wealth inequality. The third thing she comments is our institutions that have basically historically held the market in balance, families, local communities, great faith traditions, government, are crumbling or even hated. And she says you could be cynical about this, you could be depressed about this, but in fact, she's very hopeful. And so I want to have you think, how could you imagine a world where your own business solves some problem that improves the world, a more enlightened capitalism? And I want to finish my part of the talking and then get to Q&A with this quote from Kevin Kelly. If you don't know Kevin Kelly, he's one of the most influential thinkers in the technology world, in the Silicon Valley. He was the founding editor of Wired magazine. A year ago, almost today, he published an article called The Case for Optimism. You can see the URL and you'll get these slides. I'll let you have them to distribute after the talk. But he has a really important statement. In the long run, optimists shape the future. It's easy to be depressed. It's easy to be cynical. It's easy to pull back in hard times. But it needs optimism to invest in new businesses, to build new buildings, to start new schools, to build new products and services. And the thing that I'm on a mission for, and Alberto knows this about me, is the world needs more entrepreneurs, solving business problems, creating goods and services that can improve the lives of people, that can create great jobs, create wealth for owners, and improve their cities, states, communities, and society. So that's the general focus of my talk. But I'm happy to go anywhere that you'd like to know. If you'll just put questions into the chat, or if you want to ask, I'm not sure what your typical method is on the webinar, Federico.
Yes, thank you, Professor. What a great presentation, and well, very appropriate questions that we have to ask ourselves when capitalism is so much under pressure. But yeah, I will ask if someone has a question to raise their hand, and I will give them the microphone so they can ask the question directly. So if you have any questions, please raise your hand and I will give you the microphone. But in the meantime, Professor, so this basically goes down to social responsibility. Am I right?
So Federico, you're right about that. But you and I both know when we say social responsibility, so I'm a 63-year-old business person, that's often been a smokescreen for nothing, doing nothing. And in fact, right now in our school, it's very popular to do social entrepreneurship. And I believe all entrepreneurship can be a force for good. Another friend of mine who teaches at Yale, Barry Nailbuff, started Honest Tea. And his co-founder said, I want to do a business that's a good business. And Barry's comment was to him, oh, do you think I'm in favor of businesses that are bad businesses? So I'm worried about this phrase social responsibility because it seems soft and fuzzy. I actually think it's good business. If your obviously, if your customer's not flourishing, you don't make any money. If you treat your employees better, I believe there's a pretty good evidence that in general, treating employees better gets you more money and gets you a better service to the customer. I don't think I have to make any case for why owners deserve a good return. The place that's probably grown for me, Federico, is the last one, the letter. For several years, the framework was Flourishing CEO. And then I realized that you could have customers that were happy, employees that were happy, owners that were happy, and a poisoned planet, or a blighted community. And also governments are beginning to claw back from businesses when we've polluted, or when we've done, we're seeing it right now with the big tech companies. Europe especially is really going after the big tech companies for their surveillance capitalism, the way that they're just taking data from everyone and reusing it. So yeah, it is social responsibility. It's just, I'm always concerned that sounds soft and fuzzy, Federico.
Excellent. So, we
Oh, I see
listening
a
to you.
question here. Somebody says,
Yes.
what are the best ways to transmit this message into manufacturing supervisor in a fast-paced industry where pressure for production is big? I love this question. I've studied this for years, and the best answer to that is actually Toyota production. There's no one who does production faster, more efficiently. And I've worked very closely with various suppliers to Toyota. I've never worked directly for Toyota. And I've also worked with the Danaher Corporation very closely in the US. And the Danaher Corporation, I think, is probably one of the best at the Toyota production method of all the American companies. And most people, when they hear about Toyota production, talk about continuous improvement and Kaizen. And certainly that is a breakthrough. Single piece flow versus batch flow, things like that. It's so important for us to move very quickly. But the thing most people miss in Toyota production, not everyone misses it. Danaher did not miss this, although they did it first. A small company I work with in Utah called US Synthetics very much gets this. But the first pillar, it's really important, the first pillar of Toyota production is respect for person. And again, that sounds like a classic social responsibility thing. I did deep research into that. I can't read Japanese, but the original phrase in the Japanese Toyota statement is respect for a person as if they're a Bodhi being, as if they're a divine being, as if they're God. And what they meant by this, and they're very serious about it, was we want to treat our customer as if they're God. So we want to give them things that have no muda. That's the word for waste in the system. So they improved lean consumption. We want to treat our employees well and make sure that they're not wearing out and things like that. And so they streamlined the assembly line. That's a respect for the employee. They said we respect our owners. They have to get a great profit, and respect for society. And if you don't mind, I'll tell you another story. This one comes out of the US Synthetics company. They make something that is very controversial with many of my students. They're very involved with fracking. Now, I do a lot in exploration and production companies, and I also do a lot with clean energy. I'm sort of course, we don't want to pollute the planet, but it seems like to me petrochemicals are going to be around for a long time, so we need to do it better. US Synthetic makes a polycrystalline diamond that goes at the very bottom of the cutter. It's mission critical. And Rob Galloway, the president of that company, needed the company to become extremely high production, high speed, because the company was going too slow. He taught every single employee in that company, right down to the factory floor, this idea of lean production, that he started with respect for person and then went to continuous improvement. And he said, we don't hire them for their hands, we hire them for their head. We want them to be problem solvers. He said, we want 1-to-1 ratio of finder to fixer. So he taught his employees to do this. And I was walking through his factory one day in Provo, Utah, Orem, Utah, actually. And I see this young man working on the factory line. I think he had gotten a high school degree. I'm not even sure of that. And I said, do you like working at this company? He said, I love working at this company. I said, why? He said, everywhere else has hired me for my hands. This place hired me for my head. And I thought, oh, wow, they've really brainwashed this young factory worker. I said, give me an example. And he said, they taught us how important it was to keep single piece flow and to avoid bottlenecks, because we didn't want to show disrespect to our fellow workers, and we wanted to create great products for our customers, and we needed great profitability for our owners. And we had this place where the assembly line, we had to change out a part. And it took about a couple of minutes to change the part out. And I thought, I wonder if my Sears Craftsman drill at home, I could make a special attachment and get it out faster. And he said, I found that I could get the part out in just a few seconds, change the thing, put the new thing on, and it reduced the turn from a couple of minutes to a couple of seconds. And times number of turns, times the number of cells in the factory, it was a big deal. And I said, what happened? And he said, well, one day the chief, the director of operations came by, the big boss is what he called him. And he said, what are you doing? And he said, you told me if I find a problem to fix it. He said, show it to me again. He goes, and he said, come with me. And he took me upstairs. And you know, because you're obviously in production, that that often the design engineers are upstairs in these factories. So he took them upstairs to all the degreed engineers, and he showed them what he had done. And they said, you know, we can get a patent out of this. And so they got a patent from it. So the short answer is, yes, I think that by training people to focus on this, it actually benefits, it benefits high production environments, but it requires a complete way. It can't be just a one-off. Let's see, Alberto, I see your hand's been up for a while. Would you like to ask a question?
Sure. Thank you very much, Professor Bunch, for the presentation. Greatly appreciate it. So, you know, what you mentioned, I think it's easier to do when you're starting a new business, right? Because if you focus your mission on customers flourishing, on your employees flourishing, and the owners flourishing, when you're starting, right, you make it part of your culture. You make it part, you know, of your day-to-day. But just, you know, my question and AP's question that it's also, you know, typed is for companies that are already ongoing, right? What changes would they need to make, right, to change that mentality, to change that mission, I guess, right? That purpose of being, so that we're focusing on the customer, on the employee, and on the owner, right? So that all the three of them flourish, right? And just, you know, recapping, when it's a new business, I guess it's a little bit easier because you're starting from zero, you get to build it. But for large businesses that are already ongoing, right, these changes are not easy, right?
Yeah, so I love this question, Alberto. Your comment is, when you start the company, you can create the entire mission statement. And if investors want to invest in that, they can, and if not. But if you're a big going concern and you've got, for instance, pension funds that are simply trying to get a good return, their investors aren't maybe so interested in all of this. They're interested in getting a return for their retirement. So I totally agree with this. But let's start with one of the beauties of being a startup is you do get to set the culture, you get to set the mission of the business, and you can explain this. I traveled to London last week and decided to bring, instead of my normal rollerboard suitcase like old men carry, I wanted to bring a Cotopaxi bag. And Cotopaxi bag, they're real colorful, you may have seen them. And it's a B Corp, and they give back to the planet, and they hire underprivileged people, and they try to make sure their factories are run well. I never know how well they run, but probably pretty well. And the founder, Davis Smith, he started his company with this. This was, if you wanted to invest with him, you had to know that. And I know that you, Alberto, you've started your company to do good, and you're trying to hire and train your workers and treat them really humanistically because you started the company. But the question is, what if you're a general manager who gets promoted and promoted through a huge established company, and you believe that it's good to have flourishing customers, employees, owners, and society? Well, let me start with the negative. I gave this talk several years ago at an offsite to one of the largest American companies for one of their divisions. And people really liked the talk, everyone except the president of the division. As soon as I sat down for a break, I wasn't done talking. He stood up and he said, I don't want you to listen to him. And here's the quote, and I'm sorry to be a little crude. He said, I don't give a damn if our customers make money. I only care if we make money. And he wouldn't let me speak anymore. He paid me my full fee, but he wouldn't let me speak anymore. I don't think he understood that I am absolutely committed to owners making money. I think he was just hearing it as some sort of European socialism or something. I think he was thinking in old ways, and the old ways are zero-sum thinkings. This was Michael Porter in the earliest days of Michael Porter, the five forces. It was anything I don't win in a negotiation, I lose. And one of the things we've learned now in negotiation is how to make the pie bigger for everyone. And sometimes it's not possible. And when it's not possible, of course, I want my shareholders to benefit versus someone else's shareholders. So it starts with, let's just recognize some people don't buy into this. But the reason I showed Indra Nooyi is this is a company with what is it, 75, I didn't check today, $75 billion market cap, about 125 billion top line turnover. This is a huge company. And Indra has this exact same philosophy of business, and she is a tough as nails capitalist. You didn't want to show up in her office if you've missed your numbers. And when she retired, she had only moved the portfolio from 100% not good for you to 96% not, 94% not good for you. So I think what you have to do is you have to begin to make differences where you can. You've got to hit your numbers. If you don't hit your numbers, you're just fired. But I honestly think that, so I'm a grandfather, I care about this, but I'm seeing more and more that the 20 and 30-year-olds who are coming into our classes at Booth. Alberto, I don't know how much it's changed since you were there, but many students are concerned about, in fact, they say you boomers caused all these problems. We don't want to be business people our grandchildren say you caused these problems. So I don't know if that's helpful, but so the answer is it's harder in a big company. It's possible. And that's why I show Indra as an example. Let's see, Omar, you say, what are the first steps you recommend for us to do in our company so that this key message doesn't stay only in a motivational message? Yeah, so you remember my quote from Fred Adler, Omar, business happiness, he just says happiness, but business happiness is positive cash flow. I think as business leaders, we really have to make sure we have positive cash flows. If we're not hitting our numbers, if we're not getting our sales, if we're not delivering and shipping product on time, no one's going to listen to us. If we go back to the Honest Tea story, if you know about them, they wanted to have really healthy tea that was lower sugar. And they realized, and they wanted it to be good for the employees and all of these other things. And the two founders realized no one cared about their mission if the tea tasted bad or cost too much. So we have to absolutely hit our business goals if we want to do this. So I think it starts with, we've got to be really good at business. If not, then we're just like, we're social do-gooders. So some of my students that I advise are a little surprised because they think I'm so focused on social good. And I'll say, it's time for you to raise prices. Or I can tell you there was, and this was not Alberto, but it was another startup that I was advising, and the CEO was having trouble with an employee. And I listened to the CEO and I said, you've already made up your mind, just fire them. So the issue is not whether you're going to fire them, it's the calendar when you're going to fire them. They said, I thought you were so humanistic. I said, I am humanistic, but if you've got a bad apple on your team, they're going to ruin the whole team. It's not fair to the team. It's not fair to the customer. So I think it starts with, we have to actually believe that we want to do good, but part of doing good is doing our business really well. Let's see, AP asked, is the best way to become a success? Is that the best way to become a success?
It was the same question as.
Same. Okay,
yeah,
thank you, AP. Miguel,
yeah,
you're right. How would you encourage and persuade stubborn entrepreneurs to put their money where their mouth is? It is our responsibility to provide the conditions in our own workplace to ensure our associates and employees will in fact flourish. Otherwise, you and your company will not. So that's a great question, Miguel. I have found if people don't agree with this message, I can't persuade them. I look for the light in their eyes. If somebody says, I don't care, if it's like that man who says, I don't give a damn if my customers make money. I only care if we make money. I'm not gonna convert that person. So what I try to do is find people who haven't become cynical and say to them, what is the thing you can do? What is in your power to do? And remember, it starts with hit your numbers. But how do we lift up this message of there is more to business than only maximizing shareholder value? By the way, some economists tell me if you take a long enough view that maximized shareholder value is good for the planet and everything else. I just don't think most current general managers are taking that long view. So I think we have to balance them out. So the short answer is I don't try to persuade people who don't believe this. What I do is I try to find people who believe it. Nicole Doucette is one of my former students. She's concerned about too much plastic in the ocean. She's created a whole business around aluminum cans because aluminum cans, the economics on recycling an aluminum can is so much greater than recycling plastic. Actually, it's a negative economic value to recycle plastic in the US and plastic bottles. And, I'm not trying to persuade Nicole to believe in having a more healthy planet. She already is committed to that. What I'm doing is trying to help advise her. And by the way, she was listed as she and her founder created a company that was the #1 Inc. 500 in the Midwest, fastest growing company in the Midwest last year. So she's changing the planet. Her motto is more ocean, less plastic. But she's changing the planet by creating a great business. Let's see, what activities have you seen to be most valuable by nonprofits to share and sensibilize companies and local business owners with these? So Claudia, I think it starts with nonprofits are sometimes, I've advised nonprofits, I've led nonprofits. Sometimes nonprofits have a judgmental attitude that like business is bad or business needs to be better. And I think it starts with the nonprofit really has to understand the business. You have to understand the cash flows. You have to understand the pressures of the business person and become an ally to that business person. If you lecture them, if you berate them, it just makes people tense. Like notice this slide that the guy looks kind of like a hippie. I think he is a hippie, but he's just a big smile, lots of colors. And he says in the long run, optimists shape the future. I think if we talk about optimism and then sit down and say, hey, how can we help you? And there are all kinds of not-for-profits. There's some that are work-related, and there's a Young Presidents Organization member, YPO, who's his business is kind of, all he does is he gets the stuff that doesn't sell anywhere else and he resells it. His employees are all developmentally disabled adults. And he did it because he actually cared about developmentally disabled adults. But it turned out that they were really good workers because they're really focused. And then he got all kind of good PR for doing it. But he really did it because he just cared about them. So I think that I'd have to talk with you specifically, Claudia, about the kind of not-for-profit that you're talking about. But I do think that there's this back and forth. Peter Drucker years ago said, what nonprofits can learn from for-profits is efficiency. What for-profits can learn from nonprofits is how to motivate people once the dollars have crossed what a person needs to live. And most of us today have to motivate people who don't have to work for us. So one of the things I think a nonprofit can teach us is how to be mission-focused, purpose-driven, and inspire our employees. This is really true in the Great Resignation. I don't know how this is affecting Mexico. I am seeing a lot of 20 and 30 somethings saying, I just hate my job and I'm not inspired by it. My boss is terrible, things like that. So I think we have to learn how to be better at managing people. And I think nonprofits have often figured this out because you often don't have enough money to pay people. Alberto, I see your hand is up again. No?
I just never lowered it.
Oh,
Sorry.
never lowered it. Alejandro, nowadays companies need to move quick in a constantly changing world. The synergy is a key part for companies flourishing in a holistic environment. For this quantum organizations, what can you recommend the personal meaning of each person in our teams to be accomplished? So that's a big question. It's very philosophical. I'm going to answer your question, but it won't sound like it at first. I've been doing groundbreaking work on creative thinking. Our companies and our universities are really good at critical thinking, but we're actually not very good at teaching people how to come up with new ideas, how to be creative thinkers. And so I've been doing work with scholars around the world, scholars in business, scholars in the arts, military scholars. So I've been working, for instance, with the US Army's Command and General Staff College on how to make people more creative. It turns out one of the best ways to be creative is an algorithm, and I'll put it into chat. POVN is great. I don't know where the greater than and equal sign is on my keyboard, so I'll just do it this way. When you have multiple points of view, it's going to lead to a more creative idea than a single point of view. And so I think to understand the meaning for people is we actually have to get in their mind. Now, the fancy word for that right now is empathy. And again, it sounds really touchy-feely. And I'm a pretty hard-nosed business person, but I find that these soft skills, getting in the mind of another, actually will unlock so much. So instead of assuming you know what the values are that will motivate people, spending time talking with them, listening to them, ask them to tell stories about great moments in their life, and then see how do you make money. David Schwartz is the head of innovation for PepsiCo. And he spoke in my class this fall. Alberto spoke in my class this spring too. I said fall, but spring. And David reminded me that he asked the question to customers and suppliers. I think it applies to employees though. And he said, I sit with them and I say, if you could wave a magic wand, what would you want? And that's how he phrases it. Not do you want from our company. If you could wave a magic wand, what would you want? And he just begins to write down everything they say. And he says, is there any more? Is there any more? Is there any more? Is there any more? And he'll make a list of 10, 15, 20 things that people would want. And now he knows what to work on. So I think that we need to start with having enough respect for our team members that we really get in their head. And you may find out that they don't want more money. There may be something else they want. And this goes back to the negotiation tactics that move beyond zero-sum negotiating. When we got to what some people call win-win negotiation, this game theoretical approach to negotiation, we found that what I thought the person on the other side of the table wanted wasn't necessarily what they wanted. And so it's important to figure out, to get them to tell us what they want. And then we may not be able to meet what their demands are. If they want to have $500,000 a year and work 1 hour a year, probably not going to happen. But that's actually not what most people want. So I can talk longer with an eye to a clock. Is there any conclusory things or a final question someone would like to ask?
Yes, well, we have 5 more minutes, Professor. Sure. There's one more question by Enrique Alvelais. I don't know if you want to read it. It was before Alejandra's question.
Oh, let's see.
From Enrique.
Enrique. I had the opportunity to participate yesterday in a conversation. Is this supposed to say offshoring or near ally shoring as framework?
Ally shoring.
As framework umbrella to address workforce labor market dynamics on both sides of the border. It took my attention. We do not talk about immigration, challenging social phenomenon that we live every day in the border, I calculate. Oh, so Enrique, I don't know what to say about immigration, and I tend to take a really historical view. No one's ever been able to stop people movements for very long. One reason I'm involved with Alberto is Alberto has this motto, Mexico expansion. And he believes that the US and, well, specifically the Midwest of the US and Mexico need to have tighter alliances. So I think we just have to, I don't know what to say about the politics. There's always going to be politics, but we're business people and capital finds a way to flow. If there's a problem, and one of the problems is labor, it's gonna move around it. I think what we can do as business people is show why there's a benefit to uniting peoples who live close to each other. one of the biggest challenges is almost everyone, I think everyone by definition on this call can understand English well enough to have understood what I'm talking about. You know, people from the US, so few of us speak Spanish fluently. And I really think language is a huge barrier. I took 6 years of Spanish from 7th grade through 12th grade and 1 year in college. Never once did I have a native Spanish speaker as a teacher. And, you know, I've traveled to Spain. Well, I've traveled to Mexico. I've traveled up and down in Latin America, but I'm not fluent. So I think a big issue is simply, actually, most US citizens can't speak Spanish well enough. But I think that there's a real opportunity for us. Alberto talks about this Mexico expansion between Midwest and Mexico. I'm even more parochial. I like Great Lakes. The Great Lakes are the real future of much of American business because we still know how to manufacture things. And creating tighter supply chains between Mexico and the Great Lakes is a personal passion of mine, the larger Midwest also. So Enrique, I don't know how to answer your question. I'm not a politician. I'm not a macroeconomist. I tend to not, I don't think you can really close borders for very long.
What we are doing here in the border, Professor, through our institution is we have a program called Competitividad Laboral, which basically is labor competitiveness, how to help businesses to become more competitive from a labor point of view.
Yep.
So Claudia, that is connected here, is coordinating with us, with some companies, you know, how to take advantage of this problem of immigration and start helping people from Cuba, from Brazil, from Central America to stay in the border and work here, because we have a shortage of around 17,000 jobs in Juarez. And by the other hand, we have like 84,000 floating people. And so we're trying to connect spots here with the shortage of labor that we have in the border with this problem of immigration.
I think this is wonderful, and I'd love to hear more about what you're doing. I think, so remember I talked about the story of the factory where the person said, don't just hire them for their hands, hire them for their head. And I think we need to release the minds of people. And one of the things we haven't done well enough is train the poor to think. We've trained the poor to use their hands. And I'm going to be really honest about this. My father's father was a rural poor, and then he was a school janitor. My mother's father was from a slightly more wealthy farm, but he was a barber. They worked with their hands. My father has a PhD in chemical engineering, so I ended up in the wealthiest suburbs of Detroit and went on to Harvard. The reason I tell you that is in one generation, we moved from rural poverty, and we were immigrant. Literally, my father's family immigrated from a poor farm to a city so they could survive, but it was internal immigration. I think we need to be more imaginative about how we release the minds of the rural poor and the migrant forces. And I think it's a high calling for us. And by the way, when you do it, usually you can make more money because they're great.
Not only rural, Professor, but urban.
And urban, that's right. I agree. Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, that's what we're trying to do. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So when I said rural poor, that's because it was my background, was rural poor. But right. Yes, urban poor, absolutely. And when we can unlock them and train them, they're often the best workers you're ever going to have.
Right.
So
perfect. So I don't know if you have any final comments, Professor. It's 10
only
o'clock.
Only that you'll get my slides. I'll send them to Enrique. Please. And he can distribute them. Feel free to email me anytime or connect with me on LinkedIn. I love Mexico ever since I was 10 when we first went on a car trip to Mexico, all over right before the Summer Olympics in '68. Mm-hmm. And I would love to see a closer business connection between our two countries.
Definitely. Thank you for this amazing presentation, Professor. And we will, of course, continue or keep in touch so we can continue this conversation. It was a very helpful presentation, and I've received many good comments already. So thank you again, Professor. We'll keep in touch and hope to see you soon.
Thank you. I see Enrique has his hand up. I don't know if he wants to say a final word.
Yeah, just a very, very small comment. And it's about, you mentioned the Great Lakes as a future for manufacturing, Professor. And I think we need to make that connection between Juarez, Chihuahua, and the Great Lakes. I think both regions are happening many stuff. And so Professor and Alberto Villarreal and us in the US-Mexico Foundation, Federico, as we talk, I think we need to do a business delegation to the Great Lakes and to touch base with some companies there and just let's connect and explore. Okay.
For sure, definitely.
Thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to seeing you in Chicago.
And hope to see you here in Juarez soon.
Nice. That'll be great.
All right. Thank you, Professor. Have a nice day. Thank you. Bye-bye.